Right, I'm here to have a little bit of a moan about this. The GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. Now, this was, let's have a little look on this article. As this says, the Europe is now covered by the world's strongest data protection rules. The mutually agreed Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, came into force on May 25th, 2018, and was designed to modernise laws that protect the personal information of individuals. All seems pretty good so far. I'd heard about this for a little while, and most people have probably had many emails spamming their inbox if you're in the UK or the EU. Been notified by various companies that you may have bought something from once, I don't know, 3 years ago, notifying you about then how they're handling your information now, as if you care. I'm all for data protection. Misuse of data is a bad thing. There's been a lot of breaches over the years, mostly because of hackers though, most often. But the GDPR, when I've looked into it, mainly because it's affected my job, it goes way over the top, and it only really focuses on the electronic side of data protection and completely overlooks physical copies of data as though they don't exist anymore. I know we're in 2018, but people still do use paper. It's still sometimes more convenient to carry with you than a tablet, a laptop, iPad, phone, and some of the older generation still don't sort of gel with that technology particularly well. Now, overall, the data protection regulation does a lot of good. It cracks down on companies basically storing your data, how long they can store it for, what they can use it for. I know there's been a lot of backlash over Facebook recently and how they've used their data. I really don't give a toss whether they know where I've been. I've known for a long time. When your phone tells you, Adam is nearby, would you like to speak to him? I know it's tracking me because it knows where I am. As long as they don't use that data in a bad way. I mean, they can throw adverts my way if they want, if that makes them happy. I'm not going to be influenced by them. I can think for myself. But if they're going to use it to commit fraud and to filter what I see, well, advert-wise, I don't really mind. But if they're filtering political content, that kind of thing, that's a step too far. But the main issue, like I said before, is when it comes to the practical data and how that's handled. Because there is a very, very hefty fine that comes along with the data protection regulation. This is from the EU GDPR website. Let's have a little look. What are the penalties for non-compliance? So, organisations can be fined up to 4% of annual global turnover, or 20 million euros. This is not a small thing. If you're not complying, they can really hit you where it hurts, and that is a big deterrent for big companies, I will admit. But it's when you start getting a bit further into what this regulation entails where it starts to get a bit fuzzy, and it doesn't seem like it's been hashed out properly to me. For instance, it's handling personal data and what constitutes personal data, because they have to define that. They say GDPR applies to personal data, meaning any information relating to an identifiable person who can be directly or indirectly identified, in particular by reference to an identifier. This definition provides for a wide range of personal identifiers to constitute personal data, including name, identification number, location data, or online identifier like IP address, etc., reflecting changes in technology and the way organisations collect information about people. Right, this is, look, wide range. These are just a few things that they're talking about here. You're talking physical appearances as well: hair colour, eye colour, weight, height, etc. There's a million ways you can identify a person. The name isn't enough because people can generally have, there can be people with the same name, but when you start mixing that with phone numbers, eye color, etc., you can get someone's personal data pretty easily. But where the problem comes in, here we go. What constitutes personal data? So I did a little bit of research and I went into a few more websites to see what I could find. Because funnily enough, the actual government website and the EU website isn't very clear. It gives you a very brief overview, but if I was a business owner, I really would be quite lost as to what it actually wants me to do. So the GDPR's definition of personal data is now also much broader than under the DPA. The DPA was the previous Data Protection Act in place before the GDPR. Article 4 of the GDPR states that the personal data means any information relating to an identifiable person, to an identified or identifiable natural person, data subject. It adds that an identifiable natural person is one who can be identified directly or indirectly, in particular by reference to an identifier such as a name, an identification number, location number, an online identifier, or to one or more factors specific to the physical, physiological, genetic, mental, economic, cultural, or social identity of that natural person. So that's basically everything to do with you. Perhaps the biggest implication of this is that under certain circumstances, personal data now includes online identifiers such as IP addresses. I went through that, and encoded data as well. It does state that you have to have several things for it to be considered identification. Just saying John Smith, that's not. If you just take John Smith's name down, that's not enough to identify him. Physical appearance as well. Like I mentioned, there's no definitive list of what is or isn't personal data. Do you not think you need a list, EU? Why, when you create a law that is so widespread, makes so many changes, would you not have a specific list of the things that you're talking about? You just say personal data. Well, that could be many things, you say. It could also include these physical attributes, which I said. Defining characteristics. So a person's gait. This is where you start to see the framework is not fully fleshed out. Now, this throws up some interesting things. Funny enough, today I've actually been in London at a poker tournament. I'm a poker player by hobby, and I was at a regional tournament in a casino in London, and I did pretty well. I think there was about 200 and something people there. I came 26th. But they usually, when you get down to the final table, they'll broadcast it live through Facebook Live, so that people can watch what's going on. There's a bit of excitement, a bit of a hype around it, because the sport's not particularly popular at the moment, as a sport anyway, rather than gambling. And we were talking to the organisers there, and they weren't doing it this time round. And the reason being is the GDPR for these reasons. Their legal team was consulting to find a way that they could record people playing poker without breaking the GDPR, and therefore submit themselves to potentially having to pay 20 million euros or 4% of their global turnover. And it's not a big company. It's a relatively small poker company, well, biggest in the UK, but they don't do that much business. And that's a massive hit to them. So what they were suggesting is that when people come to the tournament, every single person has to sign a disclaimer to say that they are willing to have themselves on camera. That's just taking bureaucracy and paperwork filing to an insane level. You're going to make 225 people sign a bit of paper because they may possibly be on camera for an event. That's madness. Why? There's no need for it. It's completely unnecessary. And then we get, so that's one glaring problem. And the other one being this here, which actually was found originally in November 2017. I hadn't even heard of GDPR at this point. I think this is by Chris Stramiello. Is that, yeah, Chris Stramiello. Spotted the main problem with the GDPR is the fact that it basically overlooks physical documents. We'll have a little quick read through this, and I'll give you some practical examples. He gives some better ones in here actually, which I hadn't thought of. But again, talking about the GDPR coming to effect in May 2018, refers to a new set of rules the European Union intends to strengthen unified data protection. Blah blah blah. I'm going to find a bit I wanted to get to. Here we go. To date, much of the proposed GDPR legislation has focused on electronic consumer data, how it is collected, processed, shared and stored. Now I have a feeling that this is because I know we're moving into a paperless, well, most businesses are going paperless now anyways, but I have a feeling it's because the major breaches of data protection have been through online, because it's when you get to that cache of information, there's so much in one place. Hence why the hackers get so much from the banks and other places. But an estimated 60% of customer data residing in business documents. GDPR is once again shining a light on records management protection, which is a good thing. I agree that is a good thing. Many organisations already have advanced policies in place that include data retention protocols and the ability to audit electronic records and documents, including users who have viewed the document, how many times a file was opened, and timestamps for when files were accessed. Even so, records management systems typically lack the ability to manage physical records, which is a vitally important component of GDPR compliance, which is where we come into the problem. So, what was it, Chris? Sorry, I keep forgetting your name, mate. He's talking about the paper here, that most places are moving away from paper, but a lot of them still use it for many reasons, like outlined at the beginning of this video. Now, this is where we, at the end here, this is what I'm sort of talking about. Consider the example of an employee making a print copies of a digital file. A GDPR-driven retention policy may destroy the digital file, but if a paper version still resides in an office drawer, the guideline is breached. So if this employee accidentally puts this piece of paper somewhere, a drawer, it slips down the side of his desk, and it's not destroyed in line with the GDPR, the guideline is breached. And they could be fined. I'm not saying they will be, because that would be very pedantic and petty, but they can be. And that seems insane to me. When it came to my attention is, I work in retail, and we got some paperwork through explaining about the GDPR, and I was reading it, and it just didn't make any practical sense. Like, some of it did, and then there was a glaring impracticalities of it. So I work in a shop. We hire walk-ins, like young, usually kids, sort of 75% of the time, going out for their first job. They've got a CV typed out. They probably worked hard on it at home. It's got their name, their address, their telephone number on there, and a little bit about themselves. And they hand it in hopes of getting a job. Now, I've been advised not to keep these CVs because of the GDPR, because they could be left about and other people may take their information. Which leads me to the question, what the hell am I supposed to do with them? I'd like to keep them for when I need staff so I can hire them, but there's nothing in place. Maybe it's up to the company to have a system where we can log those CVs onto, but it just seems unnecessary. Why can't I just have a CV in my office at work ready to go? bearing in mind you also need consent, apparently, to have someone's data. So you have to ask them, oh, we're going to keep your CV for this long, blah, 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 blah. It's just a lot of bureaucracy on top of what we already have. So we've been advised to destroy CVs, which blows my mind. The other thing is you can't send personal information through emails. Another example of this is I was off the next day, and the guy below me was having another manager to come in to cover, and we wanted to send his telephone number so that the other manager could get in contact with him and find out where the shop was, not get lost along the way, etc., etc. We couldn't send his phone number through the email because of the GDPR. We're not allowed to hand out phone numbers all willy-nilly now, because apparently that's very dangerous and it's sensitive data. I actually have been on a rant with several people about this already. I thought I'd vent to you guys. The other thing is my mother works as a carer, so she goes from home to home caring for elderly people, disabled people, severely ill people, and she has a rota, so of the people that she has to go to see. On that are their name, their full address, and various other bits of information. Sometimes codes to key safes by their houses. Now they already have systems in place in case their employees lose these sheets of paper with personal information on, and that seems sufficient. But now, if for any reason, there has to be a system in place where the documents are destroyed. So I don't know what that's going to mean for her. My mum's told me that they're probably going digital, but my mum doesn't know how to use technology very well. I don't think she'd even cope with it very well. And the systems that were in place were fine already. I really think they should have either excluded the physical data from the GDPR, or they should have been more specific with the rules about storing physical data. Because at the moment it looks like they've sat there for, I think it was 4 years, deciding on the ins and outs of this law, and they haven't thought about the actual practicalities on the physical side of these papers, of this paperwork that can go missing, and you could potentially fine a company for that. And that just, it's just madness. This coming along with other laws and things are coming into place. I saw something by, who was his name? I can't remember. There was a YouTuber talking about an EU law being passed that would stop linking. You'd have to pay for links in the EU. We've got the UK apparently going to have a permit to go to porn sites. You have to buy from a news agents. It's just the age of madness at the moment. Along with the left-wing liberals, we have this stringent, extremely restrictive data protection laws and other related laws coming into place. It's just layering on bureaucracy where it's really not needed. Anyway, that's my rant over. If you have been affected by GDPR yourself, you've had any questions about it, or maybe you think it's a good thing and there's generally nothing wrong with it. I do think it has its good sides, like I've said, but I think it hasn't been thought through properly. Anyway, I'd like to know your thoughts below. If you could leave them there, I will see you guys again soon.